All right, let's continue talking some of the things that we have been talking over the past few weeks. This really relates to management of performance. Okay, so as people that work in sports performance, we are largely performance managers. We deal with the recruitment, the retention, the development, and then eventually the graduation of student athletes at the college level. But a lot of the principles that you can find at even some of the lower levels can be applied to what we do, and it can really enlighten some of our choices that we make. And as you guys work with us, you're going to be encountering and working with different coaches, different support staff that work with teams. And I would challenge you guys to use some of the frameworks that we have and we've adopted, but also to come up with your own philosophy too and embed that in there. These are theories, these are models to use. It doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. So take what we do, apply what we do, but then I just keep challenging you to do your own thing too. Continue to study and our professional development, our personal development, it's up to ourselves. So find new ways to do things, and I think it can go a long way. Hey Lindsay, if you don't mind, can you, on that light over there, can you hit the second button down? Perfect. Thank you. All right. Last time we dug into this pyramid a little bit, and basically this model of a pyramid takes into account a couple different things. Okay, so we'll start at the very end, and it's high performance. We've talked about high performance is essentially trying to be the best you, successfully executing what my role and responsibility is, essentially consistently outperforming others. So think about a race car, top fuel race car. It is achieving high performance only if it can consistently beat its opponents. It's the highest of the highs. Everything is taken into account. Every bolt is tightened. Every gasket is fit properly. The air pressure, everything is set up for high performance. Okay, so if that's the goal, we'll work backwards. And for that, we're going to start on the outside. We have to have a championship mindset. Okay, that comes from our performance psychology colleagues, and basically what they're saying is we have to make the active choice to enter into this pyramid. Once we have made the choice, the next area that we need to focus on is health and wellness. Like any pyramid, the wider and the thicker this block is, the more things I can stack on top. Okay, so health and wellness is comprised of a lot of different things. Let's just say it's choice 2, but it's choice as it pertains to lifestyle, decisions around making the right decisions with sleep, scheduling, staying on top of things so we don't have to have undue stress. There's a lot of different areas of wellness. There's 7 to 9 depending on where you study. These areas of wellness range from physical wellness to emotional wellness to environmental wellness, financial wellness. There's a lot of different things that set this up. But essentially, this is my life. Okay, so if I can get my life right and I'm making great decisions, I can enter the next phase. And that's this navy blue area here. We'll call these the trainable areas. So the physical is the easy one to think about. It's like developing in the weight room, developing physical robustness. Technical is my skill. Tactical is the game plan, or the X's and O's of my game. And then the mental piece is confidence, discipline as it pertains to clearing things if it's positive and negative, and that gets me to high performance. So we talked about this high performance pyramid quite extensively, and we'll continue to do so. Now I want to talk about athlete development in different parts of the world. Okay, so you got obviously us in the States, you got some European countries that follow some different types of methodology, and then you have those in Australia. Historically, us in the United States, and I'm speaking very broadly, not to one sport or to one era, but historically, we have enjoyed a lot of participation in sport. Okay, we have a ton of kids that play sport. We have a ton of kids that play some of the big sports like basketball, soccer, football. Because of that, oftentimes our model of development, especially as you get to the upper and elite level leagues, is you just take the cream off the top. Whoever rises to the top, those are your professional athletes. Whoever rises to the top, those are your guys and gals that play elite level college sport. Okay? On the opposite sides of the world, in Europe and in Australia, it's kind of the opposite. Some countries may not have as much participation, some of the smaller European countries. Some of the different areas of Australia may not have as much participation as we have in the United States. And because of that, the emphasis on development is much greater. Okay? Even in some countries, you're going to have some government involvement in some of our athlete development. And you know, that's a conversation in its own. It can be positive, can be negative at times. But basically, when we install a developmental framework to athlete development, it allows everybody to have the opportunity. It doesn't mean they're going to. There could be some physical limitations, there could be some interest limitations, geographical limitations, but if we can get some developmental structures set up, then it gives more kids, more adolescents, and even more elite level athletes opportunities to develop. Now, segue two, with this same model in the States, Europe, and Australia, our coaching, and you can group Canada also a little bit into some of these other models like Europe, is that our coaching model, oftentimes in the United States, is set up in a way that the head coach is often the power broker, the biggest decision maker. And because of that, there's a lot of money, and I guess before you even get to the coaching thing, there's a ton of money set up in American sport, especially your big sports that have professional leagues. And because of the amount of money tied to them, the head coach continues to gain some authority over the entire organization. And as it should be, they are making decisions on behalf of the development of the entire organization. In other countries, sometimes this is not the case. Oftentimes, the coach is appointed by an organization or an association, but they're just a piece in the puzzle, and everybody works together. Okay, so just a few differences between the development across areas of the country. So where we have picking the cream that rises to the top, other areas have more longitudinal development tracks. Okay, one thing that came up, there's a guy, a professor, his name is Esteban Ballier, and he coined the idea of long-term athlete development. There's a text, I've got that thrown up there, but essentially what this is a developmental, stepwise progression toward athlete development that starts with the very, very beginnings of the entrance to sport and then ends with a path two ways. They can become a professional athlete, or they can essentially just enjoy a lifetime of physical activity. Okay, so just kind of generally speaking, his and this group's overall model, which is really prominent in many European countries, especially in the game of soccer, and in Australia, and in the Australian Institute of Sport, but also in Canada, you'll see this quite heavily. Basically, what their model is at some point in a kid's life, they're kind of introduced to sport. Maybe not even sport that you think, but just kicking a ball around, throwing a ball in a hoop, not even a basketball hoop, but just something that resembles that. Moving, jumping, skipping, rolling, tumbling, climbing. That active start lays the foundation of just the fundamental movement skills. And then over time, they start to get a little bit more organized, and they start to learn to love movement. When we think about having the ability to control our body in space safely, free from injury for the most part, think about learning to read. Okay, learning to read, I can negotiate the pages of a book, I can understand a sentence first, then a paragraph, then an entire chapter, and then a book. The same thing happens in terms of physical literacy too. Kids learn how to control their bodies in space, how to love engaging in activity, and what we call here having the ability to do all that is what we call physical literacy. Now, at this point, kids have the ability to move and jump and play and do whatever. They start to develop an interest in maybe being involved in more organized sport. It doesn't have to be team sport. Maybe it's just an activity at the YMCA. But they have the ability and interest in maybe continuing to develop some maybe higher level athletic qualities. You know, working with teammates and others also comes in here. But basically the Ltad framework allows them to come from the entrance into physical activity to develop a basic, very general set of skills as it pertains to physical literacy is what we'll call it. And then they have a lot of different continuing steps that they can go through. They can train and learn how to train to improve. They can then enjoy opportunities and appreciate training to actually improve their ability to compete. And then way down the way, when we get a little bit more elite and more competitive, we start to shift to training to influence our ability to win. And what you'll notice too is at any given point, this is also a framework for just being a healthy individual. Because let's say I'm a dude and I'm 16 years old and I get to this stage and I'm like, you know what, I just love to train, but I really don't enjoy competing against. I just like being active. If I exit at this stage, I still have physical literacy and I love being active. So think about the implications of what something like this can have too outside of sport. It could be preventative health care if everybody appreciated activity and life and health. You may actually have some powerful things as it pertains to protecting people and limiting the amount of maybe insurance claims or problems that we have just in overall health in our world. Okay, so long-term athlete development was started here. We got a couple examples too. This was obviously foreign to the United States, but it has been moving toward the U.S. We have the hockey framework, very similar to what we saw in the original model, but basically starting off ages 0 to 6, all the way to the point here, but they can always leave and just enjoy physical activity. Baseball, USA Baseball has gotten into this. Theirs is really interesting too, because they have some different tracks as it pertains to development of throwing. Because of the prevalence of some injuries in the arm, especially with youngsters, they actually have some other literature as it pertains to developing the specialized skill of throwing and pitching. Okay, but like I had mentioned though, what you'll see in every one of those frameworks, USA Ski and Snowboard has one. A lot of different NGBs across the USOC have these, but what they have all in common is a general framework of entry into sport, and maybe sport is not the right word, maybe it's just physical activity, and there's 2 tracks when they get to a fork in the road. They can either leave sport and just love physical activity, and they can have the ability to teach it maybe to their children, or they can have a career in sport. For us in this area, we'll focus probably a little bit more on this area, but we always need to be thinking about how we can challenge and develop the health and wellness, the bottom part of our pyramid, so that our kids can make sure that they always love that, what they're doing. So, how do we get that point? It's basically thinking about a couple different things. What are our general movement skills and proficiencies? Okay, so we'll think about maybe in this physical bucket. What are the things that we need to teach our young athletes? Okay, and I'm not talking about the young athletes, I'm talking about here in college. Okay, so when our kids come in at 18 years old, they enter into a training plan for the very first time, what are the general movement skills that they need to have? Simple things, jumping and landing correctly, accelerating, decelerating safely, maybe engaging, leaning on an opponent, and having the ability to hold their own in space. Maybe it's as simple as just receiving a ball or making contact with the ball or an opponent in a dynamic space. But for us, just broadly speaking, not speaking about one single sport, we need to start to identify what are those general movement skills and when do they fit into the calendar to teach our kids. We need to take into consideration age. If you look at a lot of the text, especially as it pertains to LTAD, long-term athlete development, there is a clear difference between chronological age. So right now, let's say I'm 18 years old. On paper, for my birth certificate, 18 is my chronological age versus my developmental age. Let's say I'm an 18-year-old that reached my peak height velocity or puberty early. Okay, maybe my developmental age is that of a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old. So as coaches, as professionals in this area, we need to consider where is a kid developmentally versus what they have on their birth certificate. And then another thing too, I think you're going to see at the college level, even at the professional level, every single kid has different experiences with training, especially as it pertains to different sports. Some sports, training is very common. Okay? Especially in the United States, you know, let's just take the game of football. In football, the culture is training. You know, you play one game a week, you only play 10 games a year in high school. You're gonna have some exposure to training. Whereas maybe basketball, maybe not in the weight room as much. Maybe they're, you know, shooting hoops a little bit more. They're out on the court. Some kids may have some more training experience if they play multiple sports. But keeping in mind that every kid's gonna come in at a different training age, that can help us dial in what do we need to teach them early on in their career. And then broad scale with this pyramid, what are the different areas of development? It's really easy for us, especially in our area of performance science and strength conditioning, to overemphasize the physical. But what are the other areas that we can be talking about? Even if we don't have a lot of expertise in it, how can we develop the big picture as an athlete? We need to keep that in mind. So how do we do that? First thing we'll leave you with is just planning. It doesn't matter if it's a plan like this is an annual plan, a 52-week plan. It doesn't matter if it's a block plan. This is an example of like a month. Maybe it's a week plan, like a training card template. Maybe it's intricate plans for each kid over time. Or maybe it's just an example of a plan on a grease board or a legal pad page that you and your staff put together. We need to have plans that keep in mind the age, where they're coming in, where we're actually going. The last thing we'll say is if we can first emphasize the person, that's going to put us in a really good position. That's like emphasizing the mindset, emphasizing the health and wellness. That lays the foundation. Then we emphasize the athlete, okay? The athlete has all these different buckets. And just like my Home Depot bucket here and Lowe's bucket, every athlete is different. Let's say this is Nellie's bucket and this is John's bucket, okay? It's got the same capacity, but they're a little bit different. Maybe Nellie's bucket needs a little bit different things than John's bucket does. Maybe John's bucket has a little bit more robustness to it because he's been training a little bit more. So you can put some strength work on top of him. Where Nellie's bucket, he doesn't have a lot of training age, so you just need to get him with some general training. And then the final thing as you're working toward the professional, this is a scaffold. Okay? The idea of scaffolding in learning is really common and used a lot of times in the education world, because think about a scaffold. It's just kind of like a pyramid, honestly. If I'm painting a building, I can take another scaffold and put it on top of this. And I can take another one and put it on top of this. But if I keep stacking in one vertical, okay, so if I just keep adding physical, and I don't add anything horizontally, it's gonna get really wobbly, you know? So in all these different training areas, think about this as a scaffold. I gotta add physical, no question. But I gotta also develop horizontally and add some tactical side of it. Then add some technical side of it. Add some mental. So then as my scaffold goes up, it's also got a great foundation on the side. So, broadly speaking today, we're talking athlete development. And the biggest takeaway will always go back to athlete development has to have all these areas, and it's over time. Any thoughts or additions to that? Questions?
I did have a question going back to the